Alrighty, so today we're going to do the first emotion index of the 2023 MLS regular season. And usually when I do the first emotion index, it kind of also turns into the expectation index because the first emotion index is always before the season. And this is where we talk about how every fan base in MLS coming into this season, and that includes St. Louis City, of what their expectation is going to be for this upcoming season. So we start off with DC United, and I'm not going to go in any particular order. And for DC, I feel like depending on what happened this season, they could easily be right here in terms of we're rebuilding and there's no expectation whatsoever because, coming into this season, there's no doubt that DC is in a playoff, is a bare minimum kind of territory because of the way that they made some big move this offseason and completely gutted the team and kind of pretty much put the team that Wayne Rooney wants to feel like it's going to be a playoff contender. And it has to be because, knowing that he's only on a 12-month contract, this is pretty much it. This is kind of almost like an all-in year, though. Again, when you look at this roster, as I mentioned before, again, I think this could be a team that could easily get themselves to be where the fan base feel like playoff is a bare minimum to quickly go to rebuilding and have no expectation as the season goes along. Then we go to Minnesota, and for the Loons, I'm gonna put them here. I think they're gonna be in the fight, and again, their ceiling has been just so much lower that ever since the Reynoso situation has happened, and yet to this day, we still don't know exactly where exactly is Emmanuel Reynoso, and that I think it's getting to a point where since we're only a couple of days before the first game of the season that the Loons are going to take on FC Dallas, I think Reynoso is not going to be there. And the best case scenario is that eventually he will show up in the beginning of the season, but like I said, with this team have been kind of frustrated with the shtick that Reynoso's been dealing with. I won't be surprised there could be an extreme situation that feels like it's kind of unthinkable a couple of months ago, but maybe it will have to happen, and that of course is Reynoso might not be part of this team. And when Reynoso is not part of this team, the expectation I think has to be lower with this team. I don't think this is going to be a playoff team if Reynoso is not there. So I just think that they should be kind of be in the fight for the playoffs, just have a respectable season. But then again, that could be a little bit problematic because this fan base want this team to not only fight for playoff position, but also wants them to get themselves back to being a contender that they were a couple years ago. But again, just looking at this team, I think that window might have just passed, especially if Reynoso is not going to be part of this team, either in the recent time or either in a couple of weeks or not even in the near future too. But we go to the LA Galaxy. Yeah, playoff is a bare minimum for the Galaxy. It's the expectation of the Galaxy is always very high, and so I just realized my camera is a little bit fogged up here. I think this is going to be a problem. Yeah, there we go. Okay, it's refocused. I thought for a second it's not going to focus there. This camera for some reason sometimes has some focus problems, but thank goodness it refocused. But anyway, as I mentioned, the Galaxy, I think this is going to be a team that the fan base are expecting a lot out of this team, and they're gonna have to unfortunately deal with the off-field situation with the supporter group being boycotting this team because of Chris Klein still in charge of this team. I know for a majority of those that are not part of that boycott or just casual fans want this team to be a playoff team. I mean, after all, this is the LA Galaxy, and especially with how much they have improved compared to the dark days that we've seen this team gone through for a couple of years ago, this team should be a playoff team and should even be on the point where they could be MLS Cup or bust kind of territory. Then we go to the Seattle Sounders. Yep, they're going to be right back up here. So for the Seattle Sounders, again, this is a team that should be MLS Cup or bust kind of territory because I do feel like this maybe is the one last hurrah before this core is started to kind of age to a point where maybe it started to fade away a little bit. And especially knowing the fact that this season they're not going to be in CCO again, Sounders fans are expected this team to be back into playoff contention and then of course win MLS Cup in general. Then we go to their Cascadia rival, the Portland Timbers. I would say that playoff is definitely a bare minimum for the Timbers after the disastrous season that they had both on and off the field. But especially this season, getting of what they hope is the Diego Valeri replacement in Evander, and hope that he's going to be like the Hani Mukhtar type of player that many people have compared to him. I think, once again, in the Timbers fan base, there's going to be some high expectation that this team should be a playoff team. And once they get to that, it's going to be almost the same case as their Cascadia rival to the north. It's them trying to go and get an MLS Cup, knowing the fact that this they do still have some of their core pieces intact, but some of those core pieces are started to age a little bit and kind of are in the phase out period. I mean, we already saw Valeri retire from this team. Blanco probably maybe have 1 or 2 year left, and then let's also not forget to mention about Diego Chara. And as ageless as he is, as the old saying goes, Father Time is undefeated, and we don't know exactly how many year left before Chara might be defeated by Father Time, knowing the fact that he's going to be 37 coming into this season. Then we go to Atlanta United. So I know Atlanta for a long time, there's always this expectation of being right up here, but I feel like for this season, I feel like the expectation maybe is a little bit lower for this team. And I know there are going to be some Atlanta fans that has an unrealistic expectation of this team being MLS Cup or bust or playoff is a bare minimum, but knowing the fact that they're kind of going through a bit of a transitional period right now, especially having a new president in Garth Lagerwey, there's no doubt that they are kind of in this period where I think being in the fight for the playoffs will be an expectation. And I know it sounds crazy to say, because again, expectation for this team has always been high, and I think it's going to continue to be so. But if you want realistic expectation, I think for this Atlanta team to consider this to be a successful season is the fight for the playoffs. And by the way, speaking of the playoffs, because I did this video after when they announced the new playoff format, knowing the fact that pretty much every team, well, not every team, but 60% of the team will make it to the playoffs, you really need to suck to not make it to the playoffs. And I think for Atlanta, there's no doubt that they don't want to be that team and want to be one of those teams that maybe will make it into the playoffs, and see how that's going to go. Then we go to Sporting KC. Yeah, playoff is a bare minimum for this team. I mean, last season was an absolute disaster. This season, though, they are going to get some of those healthy bodies, especially with the way that, last season, especially in the second half of the year, where they were by far the hottest team in the league that did not make it to the playoffs. And I mentioned many times before of how they can definitely transition from the good run that they had in the latter part of the last season to this one too. And most importantly, they're getting a key piece on the attack in Polito back. I think expectation for Sporting KC is going to be high again. Now, obviously, the big concern with this team obviously is going to be on the defensive end, and maybe that might lower the expectation a little bit to be an MLS Cup or bust kind of team. I mean, if they would have figured out their defensive issue, I think there could definitely be an MLS Cup or bust kind of team. So, yeah, I think for Sporting KC, playoff is definitely a bare minimum for this team, especially what happened last season. But now moving to RSL. For RSL, I think it will definitely, the expectation is going to be them be in the fight for the playoffs again. It's been kind of the case for them. I mean, I know maybe their fan base want to be in this category. A playoff is a bare minimum, but I still think this is a team that they're going to be happy. The fact that they'll be in the fight for the playoffs. Consider when you look at the roster that they have kind of upgraded a little bit, but not at a point where I think they're ready to have expectation where playoff is a bare minimum and we need to go deep into the playoffs. So yeah, RSL, I think they're going to be the one that will be happy if they'll be in the fight for the playoffs. Then we go to the Columbus Crew. Columbus is pretty close to that category where it is MLS Cup or bust, and especially the fact that after what happened last season, a lot of Crew fans will want this team to be a playoff team. And I think this team is going to be a playoff team, because when you look at the quality that they have on the field, it's definitely a top tier team in the Eastern Conference. And not only the fact that, as I mentioned before, this offseason they probably made the biggest acquisition that is not actually a player with bringing Wilfred Nancy, and I think he's going to definitely bring some good things from his days with Montreal and bring it to a arguably a more talented team that is the Columbus Crew. So yeah, playoff is definitely a bare minimum for this team, and there's no doubt that this team also want to go deep in the playoffs as well, the expectation. Then we go to Inter Miami. For Miami, I would say they're kind of in that same category as RSL, where I think they're going to be happy the fact that they'll be in the fight for the playoffs. I mean, again, as much as Inter Miami has added in terms of the attack, and getting Joseph Martinez this season is definitely big, I do have question in terms of who exactly is going to feed the ball to those two strikers, and not to mention their defense. While it has upgraded a little bit, there's question mark in terms of that too. I mean, they did get that defender from Shakhtar Donetsk, which I think he's going to be a huge upgrade in terms of the back line. But still, I think this is a team that I do worry the fact that they don't have that creative player that will feed the ball to both Campana and Joseph Martinez. And not only mention the fact that both of those players that I've mentioned, they don't defend. They don't come back and help the defense. And I know usually as a striker, your main job is not really just kind of come back and help the defense, but sometimes you kind of have to do so, especially in certain type of game. And if they don't offer any defensive help, I feel like that midfield could easily be overrun. So I think overall, for Inter Miami, they'll be happy to be in the fight for the playoffs. Now, if Messi does come to this team, then I think the expectation will be right up there in terms of playoff is a bare minimum, and that they need to be one of the team that could maybe compete for the Eastern Conference crown. Then we go to Toronto FC. Oh yeah, for TFC, it's definitely up here. But like what I said about DC United, I won't be surprised for TFC if things started to fall apart for this team, and then if they go through an injury-riddled kind of season, they could easily find themselves right here, where it could be we're rebuilding, and there's like no expectation whatsoever. Because again, from what I said yesterday in the season preview, while this team is definitely an MLS Cup caliber kind of team, if they do put out their best starting 11, the question is that can they do that throughout the entire season? And my answer is definitely no, because you're going to have to rotate. There's going to be no team in the league that can run with the same starting 11 and not expect any degradation that can suffer throughout their best starting 11. So yeah, I think this is a team that, as much as the fans want this team to be a playoff as a bare minimum and make a deep run because of the roster that they have, I won't be surprised it can quickly go down to here, where we're rebuilding and there's no expectation. Then we go to LAFC. Yeah, for LAFC, they're definitely up here, though. I will say that maybe the expectation might be a little bit lower now, the fact that they have won MLS Cup and are the defending MLS Cup champion. And really, if I would have extended this into CCL, then I would have put them CCL or bust kind of territory, because I mentioned before they are one of the favorites in the CONCACAF Champions League, and that's even when they did lose Chicho Arango to their roster. But there's no doubt that with LAFC, they are still one of the most talented squad in the league, and that they're a team that I think, just like what I said about NYCFC last season, they definitely have a shot in terms of becoming the first team since their intercity rival, the Galaxy, was about a decade ago, of the last team to defend their MLS Cup crown. But they're definitely looking to try to do so. So I think they're once again in that category where, yes, they won MLS Cup, but they definitely want to win it again, or else it's not going to be considered a decent season. But then we go to the Philadelphia Union. Oh boy, yeah, the Union is definitely at the top of the category in terms of a team that is in MLS Cup or bust mode. I mean, this team, like what I said about LAFC, is pretty much reloaded for another cup run. Although I will say, unlike LAFC, where they did lose some key pieces, this team didn't really lose any key pieces this offseason. Even though there was definitely sign that maybe both Kai Wagner could be moving on for this team, he's still there with this roster, and time will tell when exactly they are going to sell some of their best pieces, which I have a feeling it could be as soon as this summer. Though if they're in an MLS Cup run, I think they're going to try to work out a deal similar to what we've seen other MLS team does, where they might sell some of their best player, but they will basically tell those clubs that we're going to just hang on to this player until the end of the season, and then we can basically give it to you during the winter transfer window. But if that, of course, is the case, this again might be the last shot in terms of this team once again be an MLS Cup contender, and maybe the last chance for them to really go for it, because I know they came so close for the past couple of years, and that they're thinking that by running the team back and pretty much make another MLS Cup run, that this is going to be finally the year that they reach the ultimate prize that they've been wanting to do for the past couple of seasons. Then we go to the Houston Dynamo. For the Dynamo, I will say that they're in this category where I think, I know some Dynamo fans would have some expectation of them maybe be in the fight of the playoffs because of some of the moves that they made this offseason. But I still think when I look at this team, this is still a team that is clearly in rebuild mode, and that I think the expectation has to be very low in this team. And I thought last season, as much as, yes, they didn't do well in the league and the standings, I thought they'd make some progress, especially on the road, where I really think that, first, they've won as much as road game as they have done in the past 2 seasons with 2. But also, I thought they started to look more competitive on the road, and they're not a team that on the road just are just kind of like free points for a home opposition. So I think for the Dynamo, there's, once again, I don't think there's going to be a lot of expectation with this team, even though I know maybe some Dynamo fans might think otherwise, and maybe they think that this team is ready to be fighting for a playoff position, or even making the playoffs as a bare minimum. But then we go to Nashville SC. For Nashville, I think the playoffs is definitely a bare minimum, but I know that a lot of Nashville fans want to say that this is got to be the year where they get over the hump in terms of getting past the second round. But I think when you look at the roster that they currently have, I don't have a good expectation the fact that's going to be one that they're going to reach. And one of the things that I want to mention when I make these expectation index is the fact that I want to set realistic expectation for what every fans is thinking. I have seen fans that have set on it unrealistic expectation, and that, for Nashville, again, some fans might think that they should not only play off as a bare minimum, but they got to find a way to get past the second round, which is something that they struggle for the past couple of years. But with the way that they kind of have downgraded, especially on the defensive front, and still have not figured out who exactly is going to be the guy that take the low off of Hani Mukhtar, and just almost pray that Hani Mukhtar will go nuclear again so that they can make it to the playoffs. I think they're kind of in this category, and the expectation is that I won't be surprised it might be a disappointing season, but at the same time, they need to still be in the fight for the playoffs and looking to try to sustain, as right now the only team in MLS to have yet to miss the playoffs in their existence. It was the Seattle Sounders, but the Sounders, of course, missed the playoffs for the first time in their franchise history last season. And Nashville, I think they're going to try and take pride of now being the team to the only MLS team to have yet to miss the playoffs in their MLS existence. Then we go to Charlotte FC. So obviously for Charlotte, I think there are definitely some more expectation this season after last season. I know they were in this category where there's no expectation whatsoever because it is an expansion team. But with the way that they have added more pieces, especially getting a DP level number 9 like Enzo Capetti, I think there's that high expectation that they could be in the fight for the playoffs. And especially, again, with the playoffs being expanded, there's a good chance that I think this team could reach that expectation. I mean, I don't think they're in that expectation level or in the category yet in terms of really be a threat in the Eastern Conference, but I think, as it is the case with a lot of expansion team, in your second year, you want to definitely establish yourself to getting close to be competing for the playoffs, or at least if you look at what we've seen in the past couple of expansion team, I think there's that now higher expectation than ever before that, you want to get it right, because we've seen the other expansion teams have been able to do well in their second year, and then we have seen some that absolutely has been a disappointment, and Charlotte definitely don't want to fall into that category, and the expectation has to be that they have to be in the fight for the playoffs this season. Then we go into the San Jose Earthquakes. For the Quakes, you know what? I'm going to put them right here, where it's not that I think they're rebuilding. I think this team definitely has some good quality, especially when I talk about the attack and the midfield, and they might have just got one of the best number 6 in the league in Carlos Grazo, and I think he, alongside with Jose Martinez and Diego Char, are going to be some of the best number 6 in this league. But I just think that, for this season, after what happened last year with such a predictable, disappointing season where they punt the season away, I think this year there's kind of, once again, no expectation. And again, this does happen when you, of course, finish dead last in the Western Conference, where there's nothing but up for this Quakes team. So I think for the Quakes, I don't expect there's going to be a lot of expectation. I mean, I would love to see this team make it to the playoffs. And I think when you look at this roster, as long as the defense can hold it together, which that's still a big question mark with this team, I think they can have that expectation of being in the fight for the playoffs. But, you know, for me, as a pessimistic Quakes fan, and as a fan that don't want to use the word hope associated with the Quakes, I'm always going to be in this category, and especially after the season that this team had last year, that I have no expectation for this team. I'll be happy if this team will be able to be in the fight for the playoffs, as that could be a real possibility, especially with the playoffs being expanded. Then we go to the Vancouver Whitecaps. You know, for Vancouver, I think they're also going to be in this category where the expectation is, once again, be in the fight for the playoffs. But obviously, the first big expectation for this team is definitely not get off to a slow start and have to use some Benny Sartini magic that we saw for the past couple of seasons in the latter part to get themselves just on the cusp of making the playoffs. But I think there's no doubt that this team wants to make it to the playoffs again. And again, one of the things about going through a deep rebuild is that you want to start to get to the point of the deep rebuild where you not only see some progress, but can be a regular playoff team. And I think this Whitecaps team, at least in the last couple of years, have shown that they can be that playoff team. And that's going to be something that they're going to try to reach once again for this season. Especially, I do think that when I look at this current roster of the Whitecaps, and as I mentioned in the video earlier, I think this might be the strongest Whitecaps team that I've seen maybe since 2017 when they finished third in the West. Then we go to Orlando City. Yeah, Orlando is going to be pretty much right up here where, you know, they're kind of almost in that category of MLS Cup or bust because of all the big moves that they made this offseason. But still, you know, when I look at this Orlando City side, I do think that, you know, there's no doubt the playoff is a bare minimum. I mean, with all the moves that they made this offseason, they have to make it to the playoffs and they need to have a good run. But in terms of being MLS Cup or bust, I don't know. I think maybe next season, like if this season they do have a good, decent year and maybe they lose in the conference final, I still think that's considered to be a successful season and they have reached their expectation, because anytime when you try to overhaul a team and add so many good pieces, it's going to take time for them to get involved. And there's also that uncertainty of, well, yes, they added a lot of good pieces, but we don't know if they're going to perform well. And, you know, as Orlando City has been kind of as many labeled as the off-season champion, yeah, that's definitely a title that I think Orlando City fans don't want to hear it, especially they were kind of awarded as the off-season champion a couple of years back, and it was a disastrous season. So, yeah, there's no doubt the expectation, I think, will definitely be high because of the new pieces, but don't be surprised the fact that I think maybe Orlando City fans shouldn't make too big of an expectation. The fact that if they don't win MLS Cup this year, then it's going to be considered a terrible season. But then moving on to the New York Red Bulls. Yeah, for the Red Bulls, they've always been in this category where playoff is the bare minimum. I mean, after all, this team does have the longest active playoff streak out of any team in MLS, after the Seattle Sounders, of course, ended their at that time the longest active streak of a team making to the playoffs. But there's no doubt that once again, playoff is a bare minimum, and I would kind of argue maybe there might even be in that category of MLS Cup or bust, because I've mentioned before, I think this might be the best roster that they have put together since 2018. There seems like there's some good quality both on the attack, the midfield, and also in the defensive area. And also they have a very flying under the radar goalkeeper in Carlos Cornell. I think if this is the year for them to finally, at first, kind of break out of this little curse that they've suffered where they cannot get past the first round, this year is the year to do so. But again, you know, this is the New York Red Bulls, and if you know about Red Bulls fan, you know, their expectation obviously is one to win MLS Cup. But if you ask any realistic Red Bulls fan, they would just say, yeah, just make the playoffs. Just make the playoffs, and then we're going to see what kind of disappointment in that so Metro moment this Red Bulls team is once again going to provide. Then we go to the Colorado Rapids. I think the expectation is going to be right here, especially after what happened last season when they failed to make it to the playoffs. I mean, last year was a huge disappointment and kind of a year where it kind of proven those doubters right with the way that when they finished first back in 2021, it was looking like a very fluke kind of season. But I do have a thing that for this upcoming season, they'll be happy if they'll be in the fight for the playoffs and look to have a bounce back season. So yeah, I think this is going to be the expectation for the Colorado Rapids. Then we go to NYCFC. So I think for NYCFC, I would say I want to put them in this category because of the fact that I mentioned before. Many people have said that they are rebuilding, but I'm actually going to put them right here, where again, as I said in the season preview, I don't think this is a team that is on a full rebuild. I mean, yes, they did lose some key player doing this off season, but at the same time, they have tried their best in terms of replacing it, and in some way, they're kind of also retooling the roster, especially in the midfield and at the back. I mean, going forward on the attack, it's still kind of the same thing. With Talis Magno leading the line, and them bring Santi Rodriguez as pretty much being the hair of Maxi Morales. That's going to be huge for this team on the attack. But I don't think many people will say that this team is going to just be a team that missed the playoffs for only the second time in their franchise history. I think they're still going to make it to the playoffs, but I think the expectation is definitely lower for this NYCFC team. And almost like they're kind of waiting for next season. The fact that next season is where the expectation is going to be high again, because they're just going to go through this kind of transitional phase a little bit, and then next year we're back to the MLS Cup or bust kind of expectation with this team. Then we go to the Chicago Fire. So again, I'm actually going to put the Chicago Fire in the same place I put DC, because again, this is just like what I said about DC. This team can easily get themselves to be in the playoffs as a bare minimum, because they trust that the current roster that they have is good enough to make it to the playoffs. And if it's not, we're just going to completely burn it down. And I think that's going to be the case, and especially if things does not work out for the Chicago Fire team, which many have predicted that that's going to be the case. They're definitely going to be back down to this category where it's clearly rebuilding time once again. It's time to tear it down. No expectation whatsoever, and hope that this time for the fourth time that we're trying to rebuild a team and trying to get this team to be a competitive team to make it to the playoff in the East, we'll actually do so. Then we go to Austin FC. Again, I think expectation is going to be again high for this team. Although, as I said, I do think this team maybe is due for a bit of a regression, especially when you see the numbers that they put in last season. It feels like some of those numbers that they put out were very unsustainable, and especially as I mentioned with the amount of comebacks that they made last season, I don't think that's going to happen again for this team for this upcoming season. But I still think that this team has a good enough roster to be an MLS Cup contender. I mean, they showed it last season, making all the way to the Western Conference Final, and now that they have that experience, they can definitely be one of those teams that could be threatened in the West. But I definitely do have question in terms of the defense with this team. Though the good news I will say about Austin fans is that I had the same question about the defense last season too. And I think last year the defense actually was pretty good to a point where we didn't really talk about too much about it. We were just more focused on the fact that they have this ridiculous kind of expectancy number, that they're just playing way over their heads, and they shouldn't be as good as what the expectancy number told them to do. And that's where again a lot of people have that doubts of this season being a sophomore slump and maybe have a regression year. But I still think with the quality that they have, and not to mention with one of the best number 10 in the league in Sebastian Driussi, when you have that kind of player, you're definitely going to be a playoff contender, and even be an MLS Cup contender, depending on if Driussi can play as good as he did last year. Then we go to the New England Revolution, and for the Rams, I mean, I guess playoff is a bare minimum because of the way that I think when you look at the current roster that they have, the window is definitely started to close a little bit with the way that I mentioned with the Revs a couple of years ago when they won that supporter shield. That was probably the best chance for them to make it to the run, and unfortunately, unfortunate circumstances mean that they basically lost in the first round. But the core that they of course built themselves is still intact, but it is going to be getting to a point where they might be thinking about that time is running out, and knowing the fact that Bruce Arena eventually is going to be moving on from this team. I mean, he mentioned that he's thinking about retiring. Maybe even at the end of this season, there's got to be that expectation that not only playoff is a bare minimum, but maybe they could be in that category of MLS Cup or bust. But again, looking at all the good Eastern Conference team, it's really hard to make the discussion that their expectation should be like that, because I think the quality of this team that they currently have, I think it's still just a tier below of what I see even some of the best Eastern Conference team like the Philadelphia Union, Orlando City, Columbus, and even when TFC does have their best starting 11. Then we go to FC Dallas. So again, for FC Dallas, playoff is definitely a bare minimum, but again, the core that they built themselves, I think it's getting to a point where don't be surprised they could be in the category where MLS Cup or bust territory is getting close, and especially if they are going to be started selling off some new notable kind of asset on this team. Jesus Ferreira could potentially be sold as soon as next off season. They also have a couple of guys from the FC Dallas Academy could potentially be sold too. So yeah, I think this is kind of the time when you have a decent roster like what FC Dallas had. This is a time where you need to strike and trying to make even a deeper run to the playoffs, because like what I said about Nashville, for Dallas, I'm pretty sure their fan base really want to finally end that curse once and for all. And that, of course, is finally get past the second round. I mean, it's hard to believe this team have not got past the second round since when Oscar Pereira was still in charge of this team back in, I think, 2016 when they lost to Seattle in the Western Conference Final. And there's no doubt that I think with the team that they have, this is going to be right up there in terms of quality-wise, similar to that team that made it to the Western Conference Final. And they hope that this might be the year where they can go deep into the playoffs again. Then we go to St. Louis. And for St. Louis, they're automatically going to be right here. I mean, with expansion team, it's pretty clear that there's never going to be expectation with expansion team. I mean, I think the only expectation if you're an expansion team is maybe I would... Actually, you know what? I'm going to put them a little bit higher. I think for them, just to have a respectable season is the expectation for an expansion team where, we know expansion team usually are not supposed to make it to the playoffs in their first season, although there's been some rare cases that of course is the case. But I think when you look at this team, I would say I'll give them a little bit higher expectation because they're one of the few expansion teams that actually have already established themselves an identity of being kind of like that team from the New York Red Bulls, play that kind of energy drink soccer brand or energy drink brand of soccer, just kind of pressing teams and rely on a lot of these young talented players to really play to their ability. And I do like the fact that they have an identity that is like that they commit in. Now, obviously, we'll see whether or not if that identity and that culture that they set themselves is going to be good enough to compete in MLS. But just to have an identity itself and just already have a way to kind of commitment of how you approach the season is definitely a good, already kind of a step forward to what we see in expansion team. Because usually with expansion team, we don't see them say that we have an identity. We always see them just kind of like, well, we're gonna see how it goes, at least in the first couple weeks, and then we maybe make some tweak, and we'll see whether or not if that maybe even could be the same case. At least in the first couple of weeks for the St. Louis side. Then we go to Montreal. So I think expectation has to be lowered this year for Montreal because last season, with the way that they sold off a lot of big pieces and talented pieces, I think the expectation is going to be going back down to have the expectation of being in the fight for the playoffs, but at the same time also looking to try to once again make it to the playoffs. And I do think that there's a chance that this team could do so, especially with the expanded playoffs. But just to know, I don't think they're going to be finishing second again. I think they're going to regress to a point where it's going to similar to what we see New England did last season, where when they lost some key pieces to the roster, you saw how much of a regression that they're going to take, and that I feel like it's going to be the same case this season for Montreal. And then lastly, we move to FC Cincinnati. Yeah, I think FC Cincinnati is definitely getting to that close to that category where it is MLS Cup or bust for them. And I know that sounds crazy with the way that in a span of 2 years, it's hard to believe I've gone from this team having no expectation and maybe be in a cusp of making the playoffs to now thrust them all the way to MLS Cup or bust kind of category. But that's what happened when you, of course, have some really good young talented player and some decent core, or like what FC Cincinnati has. Though again, some part of their core they could potentially be sold off for a big amount of money. Obviously, Brenner is going to be one of those pieces that they might be sold off as soon as the summer transfer window. But like I said, when you look at the Eastern Conference right now, I said before that the Philadelphia Union is definitely the team to beat in the East. But if there is a team that can definitely beat the Union in the Eastern Conference, it's got to be FC Cincinnati. Again, with the way that the way FC Cincinnati has built their team is very similar to what we see with the Union. And I mean, that's why we also kind of make that jokes last year when the Union were playing Cincinnati. It was basically Union East versus Union in West, though I have a feeling Union West maybe started to shift more toward the San Jose Earthquakes, because the Quakes are also starting to copy the same formula that the Philadelphia Union have made to get themselves to be such a dominant team in the Eastern Conference, at least for the past half decade. But yeah, FC Cincinnati is definitely going to be the team that might be the closest threat to the Union. In fact, they could be the team that could dethrone the Union, because the fact that the Union could be in CCL, and they might have that problem in terms of balancing both competition, that they could just solely get themselves be as the team to beat in the Eastern Conference. And I truly believe, what we saw last season that Pat Nolan built, it's not going to be a sign of regression. In fact, I think it's going to get even stronger, especially now that they have started to get some help in the defensive area and got some more starting quality the player at the back. This is definitely a legitimate team that could be an MLS Cup contender for this upcoming season. But there you have it. That is pretty much it in terms of my MLS Emotion and Expectation Index. As always, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this video? And if you think your team is a little bit too high or a little bit too low in terms of the Expectation Index, let me know in the comments below. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I, of course, will see you guys next time.